regardless of the fact, I don't really know what this video had to do. If you have any thoughts about it, just leave it in the comments. All right, how y'all doing today? We about to hop into a little reaction to first things first. Though, just want to make sure y'all like that video up, hit a little exit full screen, scroll a bit, like it, and full screen it back up. You feel me? Today's video we got is coming from Answers in Genesis, not Mr. Answers in Genesis Canada, but just plain Answers in Genesis. I don't actually think I watched a video from this channel. Maybe I have. If so, don't remember it. I really just only seen Answers in Genesis Canada because he was doing everything that I needed for my papers that one time. So I've been rocking with him ever since. Anyway, this is called These New Discoveries About Ancient America Will Blow Your Mind. Coming from 2 days ago. I don't really know what it's talking about. I see some Native American stuff in there. Let's check it out.
Where are the ancient ruins of North America? The evidence of thousands of years of civilization. In Europe, the evidence is impossible to miss. I've seen it myself. Castles littered throughout Germany, medieval walls and towns, churches from the Middle Ages. In Italy, ancient Roman temples, roads, amphitheaters in the middle of modern cities. Go to the British Isles, and the links to antiquity are world-renowned. Return to the United States, however, and the historical attractions are all post-European arrival, dating from the 1600s or more recently. Places like Plymouth Plantation, the Old North Church, Lexington and Concord, Mount Vernon, Gettysburg. Where is the evidence for civilization before the Pilgrims? It turns out that ruins do exist in North America, and they tell dramatic stories. My name is Nathaniel Jeanson. I'm a research biologist with Answers in Genesis, and this is the lost history of North America. In the thousands of years before the Pilgrims landed in Massachusetts, what happened in North America? Growing up, I learned a detailed sequence of events for European history: peoples, places, empires, timelines, names. Like the Minoans and ancient Greeks thousands of years ago in the Mediterranean. Heroes like Alexander the Great. I learned about the ancient Roman Empire who conquered the Greeks and ruled the centuries around the time of Christ, with emperors like Julius Caesar and Constantine. I learned about the fall of the Roman Empire several centuries after Christ and the rise of the Franks along with other Germanic invaders. I learned the sequence of English and French monarchs, King Alfred and Henry VIII and Louis XIV. But for pre-European North America, I learned nothing. I learned about the people encountered by Europeans at contact, the 1600s and later: Chickasaw and Choctaw, Creek and Cherokee, Lakota and Crow, Shoshone and Hopi, and many more. I learned about their cultures, their diets, their homes, their dress, their weapons. But I never learned their backstory. No connections to historical ruins, empires, timelines, or names of heroes. Until now. Recent breakthroughs in genetics have uncovered new answers and opened up new tools, confirming the validity of the oral and written records of the peoples themselves. Together with archaeology and linguistics, a detailed narrative that spans millennia has emerged. What I'm about to show you is a summary of the results of a multi-year, multidisciplinary deep dive into the data. You might wonder, how do we know that your conclusions are true? You can find the detailed evidentiary justification and documentation in my new book, They Had Names. When Europeans arrived on the western shores of the Atlantic, North America was a busy place. I never realized just how diverse the map was until later in life. What happened before the 1620s to produce the map at contact? Going back thousands of years, the earliest North Americans built geometric mounds, circles and squares. These simple shapes may not seem like much until you discover that they were built to mark astronomical phenomena. I don't know the names of the builders, the names of the nations to which they belonged, or what connections they had, if any, to peoples at contact. That's because in the centuries after Christ, North America was invaded. Relatives of the Huns in Central Asia, as confirmed by modern genetics, descended on the Americas and effectively wiped out the males who were here before. The earliest North Americans and their cultures disappeared. Several centuries later, around 8900, when several lesser-known Central Asian groups were migrating towards Europe, modern genetics tells us that another group headed east across the Bering Strait towards Alaska. This time, we know the names of the invaders. Arriving in the bitter cold were the Algic peoples, the ancestors of nations like the Cheyenne, Blackfeet, Delaware, Illinois, Shawnee, Menominee, Potawatomi, Miami, and others. Often known as the Algonquians, they were among the most successful North American native groups. There was a third invasion, this time from Mexico. Around and east of the Mississippi, platform mounds dot the landscape. The Natchez built them. The Natchez came from Mexico. Around the same time that the Algonquians arrived in Alaska, the Natchez began to erect an empire, beginning near modern St. Louis, and setting up an epic future clash whose reverberations would be felt for centuries to come. The clash almost didn't happen. When the Algic first arrived in Alaska, they found that people were already there, likely the ancestors of modern peoples in the Eskimo-Aleut language family. The Algics defeated them and may have sent some of the Eskimo-Aleut peoples fleeing east. The Algics then went south to the western part of modern Canada. There, they experienced a very different fate. The Algics' own history refrains from giving details. Around 50 to 100 years passed with little description in their records except a time of much evil. The leaders of the nation are not named. The perpetrators of the evil, whether the Algics themselves or their enemies, possibly members of the Salish language family, are never identified. But the Algonquians survived. They eventually arrived on the Great Plains, where they encountered enemies again. It wasn't the Lakota Sioux, the nation of Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. In the AD 1200s, the famous Siouan tribes of the Great Plains weren't there. In the late AD 800s, over 3 centuries earlier, the ancestors of the Lakota were near what is now modern Washington, D.C. Over the next several centuries, they would migrate west and eventually play a key role in the epic clash at the Mississippi. Who then did the Algics fight on the Great Plains? One group they labeled the North Walkers. A couple of centuries prior, in the north, they would have engaged members of the Ayak-Athabascan language family. Members of this family eventually migrated south from Canada into the American Southwest. These migrants were the ancestors of the Navajo and Apache. Since this migration was prior to the European introduction of horses, they would have gone south by walking. Apparently, the path of these North Walkers ran right into the band of Algics. The Algics eventually tired of war, and they went east, right into the buzzsaw of the Natchez. By the AD 1200s, the Natchez Empire was reaching its peak. The Algics recognized this in their own histories, describing the Natchez as the ones who possessed the East. Rather than fight, the Algics sought a diplomatic approach to entering lands east of the Mississippi. The Natchez responded by massacring them. I've been to Cahokia, the former Natchez capital. It's well worth a visit. The architecture sends a message, a clear message of power. The central precinct of Cahokia was once surrounded by a high palisade, a literal inner circle to the city. Inside the precinct, standing in the central plaza, the visitor is surrounded by platform mounds, constant reminders of who's above everyone else and who's down below among the riffraff. Monk's Mound, the largest mound, commands the most attention. It occupied even my peripheral vision when I faced it, making it unambiguous to all who drew near who was in charge. Cahokia also has a mound with sacrificial victims. Apparently the Algics weren't the first massacre for these aggressive rulers. But once again, the Algic survived. They regrouped, found allies from the north, likely the ancestors of the Lakota, Osage, Quapaw, Omaha, and other Siouans, and defeated the Natchez. Thanks to the Algic historical records, we even know the name of the Algic hero. At the time of European contact, indigenous Americans used a naming style that was descriptive and memorable. Names like Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, Red Cloud, Man Afraid of His Horses. Apparently this practice was centuries old. When the Algonquians were tragically slaughtered, they were led by a man named Strong Ally. The fortunes of the Algic nation turned when Sharp One, Stirring, and Breaking Open were in charge. The final blow against the Natchez was struck by a hero fittingly named the Crusher. After the Algic sent the Natchez packing, the Algic spread out through the woodlands east of the Mississippi. The Shawnee went south to Florida and back again. The Ojibwe went northeast to the Atlantic and back to the Great Lakes. The Delaware, Mohegans, and others, including the Massachusetts and Narragansett, kept going east where they hailed the newly arrived Europeans in the AD 1620s. Which means that if the Crusher had not been successful, the Pilgrims would have landed on the shores of Cape Cod and encountered not the Massachusetts or Narragansett, but somebody else. For more on this narrative and others like it, including the dramatic abandonment of the cliff dwellers of the American Southwest, check out my new book, They Had Names, tracing the history of the North American indigenous people.
Very respectfully, because that was interesting and I actually loved learning about that. That was typed fire, like I won't even lie. But like respectfully, that had I won't say nothing, but he didn't elaborate on what that had to do with Genesis, and I feel like I just kind of wasted my time. I'm still posting this because like I'm not gonna not record it and then not post it, but like, if I attempted to do my own rationalization of why this is on the Answers in Genesis page, I would say that it showed that people came over from the Bering Strait, showing that the Bering Strait was there, even though that's not like a scientific, that's just a culturally thing. Like, people did come over from the Bering Strait. There were already people here. Question now is, how did they get here? Did they come over even earlier? You know, from what thing? Whatever you want to say. Yeah. Is it saying like they had history too? And that this is the main thing I can come up with. I just had to scratch my brain for a minute, metaphorically speaking, that the history that we've all been told, right? This is the history that we don't even get told. And it only happened a little over 1500 years ago, right? We know more about the Roman Empire, and even before that you hear about the Berbers in global class, or at least I did, right? People like the Berbers, I only remember because their name is funny, right? I don't really remember. Mesopotamian things, right? Ancient Egypt, which is like way into the BCs, and we learn about all these types of stuff. But why don't we hear about these people and their story, especially because we live on their country now, right? Like, I know more about, you know, Louis the whatever and King Charles the whatever and freaking Julius Caesar and Constantine and them. We know about them, right? I ain't never heard anything about the Aborigines in Australia's history. You know, we're talking about global history. We're kind of just talking about the random people groups of Africa and Asia, right? You're talking about the Chinese dynasty. Why do I care about them? Why don't I care about the people that this country was built off the land of, right? The people that we don't even hear about. You know, the Navajo language is endangered. Duolingo is trying to do its best to save it or whatever. Why don't we learn about that? Why don't we learn about why it's an endangered language? You know, is at least a sign of respect to these people that we keep their history alive or something. I think I'm low-key, like, I think I'm part Cherokee or something. I don't know. I got some Native American in me, regardless of the fact that I don't feel anything special about, you know, we're represented or whatever. Like, it wasn't a big part of my culture, at least from what I know. I just know that it's part of the reason genetically why my hair turns a bit red in the summertime. Or that's what I was told, right? But, like, I guess it goes to say that, like, we don't get the history everywhere of all at once or something, or that, like, the dominating culture's history is what gets passed down and taught. And then, like, for us, it's kind of just, you know, everybody else is kind of like, oh, well, your history gets erased. And then I guess our history gets erased. So, you know, whatever these cultures passed on, right? Like Greek mythology. Everybody knows Greek mythology. Not as many people know. Or some people know Egyptian mythology. We don't know Native American mythology like that. We don't know Aborigine, you know. We don't know Asian mythology like that. Hinduism, all that type of junk. Like, we don't know that. We just get told Greek mythology. Why? Because our ancestors, well, the white people's ancestors that came over to America, right? And I'm half white, so, like, technically my ancestors too, right? And they all came over and they spread their cultures. Now, why Greek? I don't know. Well, probably because it aligned so much with the Romans. There's just the different names, right? But I don't know. Regardless of the fact, I don't really know what this video had to do. If you have any thoughts about it, just leave it in the comments. If you have any inklings of why this video might be on the Answers in Genesis Canada, because he didn't explain really, please let me know in the comments, and I'll see y'all next time. All right, that's gonna be the end of the video. Hope you guys have yourself a fantastic rest of your day. Peace.